And welcome back to the show. The Ladies of Hope Ministries is a New York-based not-for-profit with the vision to end poverty and incarceration for women as well as girls. Their mission is to help disenfranchised and marginalized women and girls transition back into society through resources as well as access to high-quality education, entrepreneurship, spiritual empowerment, advocacy, as well as housing. Our next guest, who was recently appointed as the Goodwill Ambassador for Social Justice of Incarceration Reform for the United Nations, has worked and continues to work relentlessly in her fight for the dignity, decriminalization, and decarceration of women and girls. And joining us to tell us more details is the founder of Ladies of Hope Ministries, Topeka Sam. And Topeka, good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Daren. This is a great honor.
Well, it's a great opportunity to talk to you, and it's a great honor to talk to you in the work that you're doing, particularly when it comes to women in incarceration. We know that incarcerated women have a lot of struggles, and you've done a great job in terms of really highlighting some of those struggles and really calling for decarceration and forming your Ladies of Hope Ministries. But for somebody who's not familiar, please let us know a little bit about Ladies of Hope.
Ladies of Hope Ministries looks at our work through two pillars: one, direct service and sustainability, and the other, policy and advocacy. It is critical that we are fighting and doing that through legislation, making sure that we're giving policy recommendations, because that's the only way we will be able to physically decarcerate. And when I say decarcerate, for people who may not understand that term, release people from prison. But we also have 1.1 million women who are presently engaged in the criminal legal system, whether it's through pretrial, probation, parole, and or physical incarceration. And so we're looking at how do we stop measures from women and girls going in? How do we make sure that we're creating alternatives to incarceration? And then lastly, making sure that we are decarcerating. And so again, with the policy and advocacy piece, what I tell people all the time is that I can't think about fighting for someone else or even fighting for myself if my basic human rights are not met, which is safe housing, an equitable opportunity through job, employment, career development, education, and food. So our programs address that on the direct service and sustainability side. So we have Hope House, which is a safe housing space for women and girls, which is presently in the Bronx. We're scaling that through the 5 boroughs in New York City. Also, we're presently in New Orleans, Louisiana, and going to scale that through several states in the country in the next year. Also, we have our Angel Food Project, which is a project that partners with Instacart, Fairway, Wegmans, Whole Foods, and other supermarkets in the city, where we give fresh bags of donations of groceries 7 days a week, 365 days a year to families impacted by incarceration. One of our newer programs are Pathways for Equity, which is a program we have partnered with Virgin Unite with to make sure that we are urging companies across the globe to make sure that they are giving people who have criminal convictions second chances through real career development, fellowships, paid fellowship opportunities, and opportunities within corporate America. There are 70 million people in this country who have criminal convictions. We know that having to check a box is a barrier. Though again, we've had legislation where it's passed and stated that, hey, we can remove the box. And so a person doesn't have to check the box and they actually get a conditional offer of employment. What happens then, they still have to consent to a background check. And consenting to the background check so often, because New York being one place, but many of the states across the country are at-will employers. And so when the background check comes back, it shows that a person has a colorful past. Immediately, the conditional offer is rescinded and a person doesn't have a job. So that's why we have our Pathways for Equity. And then on the other side, through the policy and advocacy, we have our Faces of Women in Prison program, which is a program where we train women and develop women how to use their voice to share their experiences for policy and legislative recommendations, but also as a career, as a public speaker, to get paid. So often people tell their stories, reliving those messy parts of their lives, and then they have to unpack that trauma and aren't being compensated. So we're making sure, like any other expert that is using their experience to share, that they're being compensated through our Global Speakers Bureau. And then we have our Probation and Parole Accountability Project, which teaches people what their rights are while they're under surveillance. You know, I talked about earlier the 1.1 million women who are presently engaged in the criminal legal system. there are 2.2 million people presently incarcerated in this country and 4.6 million people who are presently under surveillance through pretrial probation or parole. And so we're addressing that population. So we created a Know Your Rights guide so that people understand that while there are expectations of them, there are also expectations of their probation and parole officers. And how do you build healthy relationships so people aren't actually just always getting hit with technical violations and being sent back to prison? Because we do know that the majority of people who are sitting in our prisons and jails in this country are there because they can't afford bail and or because of technical violations, not new charges or new arrests. And then lastly, our last program that's also launching this year is our Epic Ambassadors movement. That's a program that's been funded by Arnold Ventures and recently the NFL. And with that, we're going to be, again, training women how to use their voice, but also how to draft and write policy who have been impacted by incarceration, both women who are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, family members, and girls, partnering with local elected officials to move that legislation, and then partnering with lobby firms so they become registered lobbyists in their state. Again, another way to have an equitable opportunity within a space that not only we're directly affected by, but also that we want to change.
Can I ask you a question about personal experience, right? Your personal experience, you spent time incarcerated. Now you're letting people know what it is on the other side, right? From both the inside to the outside. Give us a little bit about that, because when we understand living life on the inside, coming and transitioning to the outside, there's a lot of things that, if not, recidivism happens, right? And so what are some of those things that we may not be so familiar with, who are people who don't have experience in the area of incarceration? What are some things that we can pay attention to know about the life of a person that comes out and what those needs are coming out to be successful?
Absolutely. So like I said before, that people coming out, they need support, right? And so the Know Your Rights guide for us was to let people know what to expect. But outside of that, housing. Whether, when I think about when I went to college, for example, and I left and I was doing great when I actually lived on campus, right? When I decided to move off campus because I thought I was grown is when life started happening. I had bills to pay, all these other things. But it's the same thing, whether you're in college, right? You go to college, you come back into your community, you need somewhere to live. Whether you're homeless and you're expected to have a job, you need somewhere to live. Whether you're just any person in this country or beyond, you just need somewhere safe to live. And so housing to me is the number one need for anyone transitioning and or just needing to have a healthy lifestyle. And then, when I think about barriers, right, there are 44,000 barriers for people who are returning into their community from prisons or jails or with criminal convictions. And so through that, there's, life insurance, for example. We can't get life insurance. There's certain jobs that you can't get. There's you can't. Second Amendment rights are taken because of gun permits. You can't vote in many states. You cannot register to vote or participate in the voting process. There are certain travel restrictions. You can't. For me, I had a probation officer that told me every time I wanted to leave the Bronx, where I presently lived, going to Brooklyn, I had to ask for permission. Like, I thought it was ridiculous, and their supervisor said it was ridiculous. But at the time, they thought that every time I left one borough to the next, that I needed to call and get permission prior to going. Every time you try to travel out of the state, you need permission. So, we call them, they have these forms called travel authorization forms that people have to travel with. We call them slave papers because it reminds us of that time. The language in it, everything. It's just as if people are tracking you at every single step of the way. And so it's incredibly difficult. And then to think about reunifying with your family, getting your children back, wanting to pursue higher education. It's all of these things that you have to worry about. And, making sure that you're not reviolating because your probation officer has a bad day, So it's all of these things, unfortunately.
Well, I want you to know that a lot of people are asking questions. You've made headlines yourself, receiving a presidential pardon from President Donald Trump. Talk to us about how the pardon actually came about.
By God. And that is an honest statement. I did not know that I was going to receive a pardon. I didn't apply for the pardon. There is a pardon process where you put in an application to request it. I received a phone call from Alice Marie Johnson saying that Jared Kushner called her and told her that they were going to support my pardon, to give me a full and unconditional pardon. And so there were people like Daniel Loeb, who supported and made phone calls on my behalf. Jessica Jackson, who again supported and made phone calls on my behalf because he was doing pardons. And so because of that, they called and gave my name, and my work speaks for itself. The dedication that I've committed to this space since my release from prison in 2015 speaks for itself. And so I'm just grateful to God. I know God can use anyone. And I'm just grateful that God used President Trump and that I can get my full rights restored back, and do some of the things that I talked about just a while ago that I could not have done, even with the fact that I'm in this space doing the work, and am a national leader on this effort.
Right. And we know that even though you've been pardoned by the president, I know that you have a voice against what you've seen lately. Talk to us about that, because I want people to be very clear. Like, you did receive a presidential pardon, but there are some other things that you definitely want to do. And one of the things I spoke to was the fact that you had an article, an op-ed in the Washington Post, and that op-ed said that Trump pardoned us, but pardons don't replace criminal justice reform.
No, absolutely not. They don't. And, I'm also a senior advisor at New Yorkers United for Justice, where that's what we do. We urge the governor in New York State to make sure that they're doing a comprehensive criminal justice reform package to make sure that we're releasing more people from prison. And so, I heard you mention about what I've seen in the country, as let's just be specific, at the Capitol, these last few days. And the way that I see things, it is completely unfortunate that we are having to relive all of the biases and injustices that people of color have faced, way before my life has even been thought of or existed. I always say that what I know is I don't like everything about any one person, like there's people in my family I don't love everything about. I love them, but I love everything about them. What I can say about President Trump was that when there had been criminal justice reform and prison reform legislation that was proposed to this president administration, that they took hold and that they signed the First Step Act, and over 14,000 people have been released from prison because of it. And what I will say is, in the last several decades, there has been no other criminal justice reform legislation on a federal level that has passed that has released that many people. With that being said, is that enough? Absolutely not. Because when you think about where the majority of people are in this country, where it comes to incarceration, they are in the state, city, and county jails. And so it is the governor's responsibility to begin to pass legislation to do clemencies, pardons on a state level that will also help to release people. But we should be able to roll back some of the injustices and the harm that has been caused over decades. And that has not been done. And so, I'm more hopeful that as we move forward, while people are seeing, the great disparities, it's kind of in your face now. We can no longer say, oh no, that's not happening. Like Black people are just bugging out. That's not true. Everyone is seeing how Black people are treated very differently than white people are treated, as it relates to even what we saw at the Capitol. If there were Black people who were outside that Capitol, there would have been a massacre on Capitol Hill. We do know that. There's no denying that. However, what will I say that we're at this place in this country because of President Trump? No, we're at this place in this country because of the history that we've had that we have not taken hold of. Can I say that because of what has happened, that also has elevated and given people more power, if you will, or the freedom to begin to speak out? And, I, as a Black woman, wish I had that same level of freedom. Unfortunately, in this country, we just don't. And so, the way that I see that we even change the racial dynamic in this country is by making sure that people have equitable opportunities. When you're changing capitalism, when you're making sure that there's equity across the board, then you have a different playing field, right? Like when my pocket is matching that of my counterpart, then my power is a little different. And so, I think that we should really begin to talk more about that, and less about like what's happening. Let's put our money together as a community. Let's make sure we're reinvesting in community-based organizations and the people within our communities so that we're not having these type of issues and that we are more armed with education, with access to resources, and with opportunities.
Walk me through a little bit about women in prison. When we talk about some statistics, I got some very telling statistics about women in prison. And this, I know, fuels the work that you do. 86% of women in prison are survivors of sexual assault. 80% of women are in prison are mothers. 77% of women in prison are survivors of partner violence, and 50% of women in prison suffer from serious mental illness. Now, if you'd have asked me before prepping for a segment like this, did I actually know these statistics? My answer would have been no. And I think that that's not just my answer, but I think that's the answer for a lot of people across America. Give me a little bit about like what we don't know and how your work is actually trying to bring some things into balance.
Right. So the numbers that you said, that's right. But even when we're looking at, those are the reported numbers, right? There's still a stigma around sexual trauma, violence, partner violence. And so there's many issues and instances where it's not even being reported, but it is happening. When you're looking at the amount of women who are presently being sentenced to life in prison, they're being sentenced to life in prison, double the rate of men today. When you're looking at the number of people with mental health issues, you said 50%, it's actually over 90% of women who've been incarcerated reportedly have mental health issues, which range from anxiety, PTSD, that can all go up to something more severe. And so the numbers, again, like I said earlier, they're consistently escalating. The way that I see to change these things, again, are just one, bringing awareness, which is what I'm doing now, having this conversation with you, being able to have conversations like this on other platforms, sharing the information so people get activated, upset, and want to make change. But then providing, again, equitable opportunities and resources to women and girls within our communities, because I'm a firm believer that when we change a woman, we can change the world. And so often we think about, even with our brothers who are incarcerated, and they say, well, the numbers of men are more incarcerated than the numbers of women, even though it's growing up, it's going up. But I say for every man that is incarcerated, there is a woman, there's a mother, there is a daughter, there's a grandmother, there's an aunt, there's a girlfriend, there's a baby mama, there's a mistress, there's a pen pal. There are so many women that are attached to that one brother who's incarcerated. And what we don't often talk about is that families are also incarcerated when you are incarcerated. So like my time was difficult, but I know how much more difficult it was for my loved ones. And so, I think that as we are creating this balance, to your point, that is critical that we're also creating a national conversation around the numbers of huge impact. And so 1 in 3 adults are impacted by the criminal legal system through an incarcerated or formerly incarcerated loved one as well.
Before we go, how do people get in touch with the work that you're doing, your ministry, and how can they play a part?
Sure. So the organization is the LOHM.org, THELOHM.org. They want to learn more information or if they want to give. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so your deduction is tax deductible. You can text the word the LOHM 2020 to the number 41444. That's another way to plug in, get information, be a part of our newsletter, know what's going on. If you have things that you want to donate, whether it's time, whether it's opportunity, whether it's clothes, whether it's food, you can always give us a call, email us at info@thelohm.org. And then also what I would say is make sure that you're reaching out to a loved one who's incarcerated. Again, I talked about the numbers. And so often it's that person in our family that we kind of write off. Especially in communities of color, that person has been in and out of prison. They struggle with different types of issues. And so at times we we, and I say we, because I'm still a part of that community, regardless of whether I received a pardon or not, we're just kind of left to fend for ourselves or left to die. And, I encourage all the viewers to call your prisons. Make sure that your loved one is safe, especially now in COVID, especially now in New York. The numbers are increasing. I think they said it was over 3,000 reported deaths happening in New York State prisons right now. See what you can do for compassionate release and getting people out of prisons. Write your governor, your local elected official, see what they're doing. Open opportunities within the community for people to come home and just be a good neighbor. I mean, at the end, I am a woman of God, and I believe in what the word of God teaches me, and that is to love thy neighbor as we want to have ourselves to be loved. And so, our people who are in prison are the least of them. And it is important for us to make sure that we understand that 95% of all people who are coming home, who are in prison, are coming home one day. And it is all of our responsibilities to make sure that we are creating safe communities, not just for ourselves, but for the ones who are returning into them.
We got to leave it there, but thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. And we certainly want to continue to follow the work that you're doing. So make sure that you continue to stay connected with us. And of course, we'll definitely be staying connected with you. Topeka Sam, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Daren. I really appreciate this opportunity. Happy New Year to you and all of your viewers, and God bless you all.
Bless you too. Happy New Year. All right, listen, taking a quick break here on the Social Justice Forums. We encourage you, don't go anywhere. We're coming right back right after this.